The inspiration for the famous show Ted Lasso, and actually Jason Sudeikis' high school basketball coach. We were honored today to be joined by Coach Donnie Campbell.
And I loved his MVP philosophy, and it's not about most valuable player. Dig in and listen.
This is the Limitless Leadership Lounge, where Coach and Jon learn along with you from some of the world's most decorated leaders. Recently promoted, let's sharpen the saw together.
Who inspired Ted Lasso? If you have not seen the show Ted Lasso, it's one of my all-time favorites. But the actor that plays Ted Lasso is named Jason Sudeikis. And Jason was coached in high school basketball by our next guest, and we're really excited to bring him on. Coach Donnie Campbell was a math teacher and a high school basketball coach in Kansas who was plucked out of obscurity when Jason Sudeikis, the American actor and star of the 5-time Emmy Award-winning show Ted Lasso, revealed to Stephen Colbert on The Late Show that Campbell was in part the inspiration for the lead character he plays with wit and wisdom. Coach Campbell just retired. He coached for over 3 decades as a basketball coach, but just finished his teaching career with 40 years. Now he travels the country giving positive messages and leadership to organizations all over. And Donnie, we're really excited to have you today. So welcome to the Limitless Leadership Lounge.
I'm extremely excited to be with you guys, and I love talking about Ted Lasso and Jason Sudeikis and maybe some leadership things as well. But I'm very blessed that I'm able to, all of us in teaching and coaching and when you're in education, a lot of times you don't really see. You plant a seed and it grows, right? But a lot of times you don't get to see it right then. I don't get to see it till 5 or 10 or 15 years. With Jason, it was 25 years. So very blessed.
Well, we got to dig in. We're not going to make our audience wait too much longer, but you got to tell us a little background and maybe a story or two when you worked with Jason.
Well, I coached Jason Sudeikis at Shawnee Mission West High School, and he was really a joy to coach. I don't think people realize he was a really good basketball player. A little quirky, what you see on what you see on the TV screen, of course. He was the same way, a jokester. But when it came to get between the lines, he was a competitor, really good teammate, a joy to coach. I mean, I have a lot of stories about him. But the one story I do remember, it kind of tells you a little bit about Jason, was we're playing in a tournament, one of the tournament games. Jason would be wide open underneath the basket, and his teammate would give him a perfect pass. And instead of shooting a layup, he kept passing the ball back out to his teammates so they could score. So he could get the assist. I kept telling him as coaches do, Jason, shoot the bunny shot, shoot the layup. Well, he kept doing the same thing over and over. But so I did find out after the game that Jason knew that he was close to the assist record for the tournament. His teammates laughed the same way. I'm sure at that time I didn't laugh as much.
Well, it sounds like he's selfless, when you tell that story until you reveal that important fact.
Yeah, that's funny. I do got to interject one more thing though, because Johnny and I got a chance to talk before. You got to talk one more story about Jason about the fact that something about defense.
Oh, well, Jason would much rather play offense than defense. And at times he did some things with the ball because he was a point guard, he was a left-handed point guard, and he liked putting a little more pastry on his game than his coach liked, some no-look passes, some behind-the-back passes. And he didn't like playing the kind of defense that I wish he was play. So it was brought out on a TV morning show by Jason himself that I nicknamed him Jason Sudeikis. I took the D out of his name because he didn't particularly like to play defense. And that is a true story. I do remember that, but he really was. And that group of kids are still into contact with each other. They still text each other. They're still really good friends. And, one of his friends there in Kansas City has a business, a t-shirt business, and Jason, and during COVID, this business was struggling, as many businesses were at that time. Right. And somehow Jason found out about it, and he started wearing. He said, "Hey, send me those t-shirts. I'll start wearing them on the show." Well, they couldn't keep the t-shirts on the shelves,
Wow.
He still cared and was committed to his teammates 30 years after playing. And that tells you a lot about Jason's character right there.
Yeah.
Really proud of him.
Wow. Well, what about you, Coach Campbell? We got to ask because when Jason revealed that you were the inspiration for Ted Lasso, tell me how that changed your career and your life.
Oh, it's surreal. Um, I found out walking to my classroom one morning. I was a math teacher, and a colleague yelled at me, "Hey, there's the famous basketball coach that inspired Jason Sudeikis' new show, Ted Lasso." And I didn't know anything about it, and so went home that night, and my wife and I started watching it and fell in love with it. But it's changed my life tremendously. I get to speak around the country. I did 47 events last year on leadership. People know who you are, and they always are asking you questions about Ted Lasso. I remember I'm speaking at an event in Chicago, and it was a huge event. There's like 3,000 people in the stands, and I'm in the back, and it was a really neat setup, and I'm sitting behind the stage, and they're getting ready to introduce me out on the stage in front of these people. And I pinch myself because I think just 2.5 years ago, I was in front of 25 kids in a math classroom teaching mathematics at a smart board. And here I am getting up on stage and talking to 3,000 medicals people. And it's just surreal what's happening. And I'm loving every second of it. I'm sure coach feels the same way. You can take the coach out of the gym, but you can't take the gym out of the coach, or vice versa, right? You're always a teacher, you're always a coach. And I always felt like, and I said this earlier when Jim and I were talking off camera, but I never really coached basketball. I taught attitude.
Mm.
And many of the sayings that you see on Ted Lasso, of course, they have better writers on Ted Lasso than me, but I'll guarantee you, Jason got many of those from me because we would always start practice with a John Wooden. I love John Wooden, and I would talk about certain quotes and things that John Wooden had. Maybe it was on honesty or integrity or whatever it might be. I did that, and he was actually listening. But I think, and coach would say the same thing. You didn't get into coaching to make a lot of money, because we never made a lot of money. You got in it to make a difference.
Yeah.
And to see these kids now, I've been out of coaching now 8 years, but I constantly get texts from former players. I get emails from former students, saying, "Coach, I'm so happy for you. I can still see you." And many of the quotes you would say. In fact, I was speaking at an event in Nashville, and a young man came up to me and said, "Coach Campbell, do you remember me?" I said, "No, I'm so sorry, I don't." He goes, "Well, I had you as a math teacher 20 years ago." And
Wow.
I said in kind of a flippant way, I said, "Well, you don't have any psychological issues or anything." He said, "No, no, coach." He goes, "You were awesome." And he says, "Coach, I remember I used to always be tardy to your class, and you'd always tell me, hey, you got to go to bed at night. Like my dad used to tell me, you can't stay up all night hooting those owls, expect to soar with the eagles." And that's the quote he remembered. But he has a spiral notebook, and he didn't have it with me, of all my quotes that I would use in class.
Wow.
And so that's the impact that coaches and teachers that make on, and it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Yeah.
And as we get older, we learn to say those things in a better way.
Yeah.
I'm sure Dr. Trigg, who you and I talked about earlier, when I was a young coach, I got after those kids pretty good. And I think as we get older, we do it in a different way.
Yeah.
And with Jason's group, they were a joy to coach though, and Jason was a joy to coach too.
That's really cool. Well, I got to dig in because I'm like you. I love quotes. In fact, I would give a quote to. I did a theme of a week. I actually got this from Tom Osborne, the great football coach in Nebraska, where he did a theme every week. And so I would pick a theme like teamwork or attitude, and then we would give a quote about that at the start of practice. But I'm just curious because I'm a big quote guy. Can you give us two or three of your favorite quotes?
I got interviewed on another podcast about 2 months ago, and the guy asked me a great question. And fortunately, I remembered this, but he said, if we interviewed one of your players, what would be the one quote that they would remember? And
Mhm.
it just came to me like that. And it says, you don't have to win a championship to be a champion. And that is just basically how we live our lives, correct?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
trying to be your best every day. And then the one that, and it's really not a quote, but it's something how I used to try to frame my life. And I try to, and of course, I'm a spiritual person, but was John Wooden's two sets of three. I really like that. I think it, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. That was the first set. And then don't whine, don't complain, and don't make excuses. I
Mhm.
really love that. And I would constantly use that with my players, um, because the first ones are basically how it's partly to do with trust.
Yeah,
Every team is based on trust. And I think sometimes people think that trust is just developed by what you say, and that's important, honesty, integrity.
yeah,
But it's also your actions every day of being consistent, dependable, that people can believe in you by what you do every day, your consistency and your dependability. So that's what we talked about, and that's what I used. And Jason, you'll see a lot of those stories and things are in the show, but it's in it. Again, they have better writers than me, I promise
yeah.
you.
Well, of all the mentors, coaches, and teachers that Jason has had throughout his rise to incredible success, why do you think he chose you? Why were you the inspiration for what has now become an incredibly famous Ted Lasso?
I don't know. I just know that I was a young coach, very, I like to, I'm from a small town in Kansas. I'm kind of a country boy, and he did mention one thing on one of his interviews that he remembered me talking about Lyons, Kansas, where I'm from. It's a little farming community. So I think he remembers, I think people really remember your inspiration. They don't remember the offense or how I taught them to shoot a jump shot. They remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
I know Coach and I've talked about this too. I was a demanding coach. I
Mhm.
wasn't a demeaning coach. And players are going to remember that you believed in them.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean you didn't hold them accountable, which
Right.
I did. But they needed to know through thick or thin that even when things didn't go well, that I believed in them. And that is so important in leadership. It's so easy to give out kudos when your sales department or whatever is making a lot of money.
Yeah.
But what about when things aren't going well? And I was so lucky that I had parents who believed in me. They held me accountable. I had coaches who believed in me and teachers who believed in me. And then I had a terrific high school coach that I took my first assistant's job for who mentored me. And he was a big John Wooden guy. Um, he mentored me so much about it. He taught me that it's not about you, Donnie.
Mm.
Mhm.
It's about the players.
Yeah.
And I think in leadership, I think any people get that they're over people, they're in management or whatever. Your job hasn't gotten easier, it's got harder
Yeah.
because now it's your job to develop those people and to
Right.
know every day that you're supporting them and guiding them. And that's another thing I miss about coaching is every day going in the gym and sweating with your players. There's just nothing like it. And I miss that. I'm sure coach would say the same thing. You know, I miss the smell of a gym.
It's funny, Donnie. You got me thinking again, because I've been out of it 10 years now coaching. And I always used to kid my wife is that one of my miseries in life is if I walked by a gym and there was no bouncing balls.
Oh yeah.
That was something that just in fact one of my former players ended up being a really good player. He used to call the gym the basketball room. But so I got to delve in, Donnie. We want to help young and emerging leaders. You were a head coach for a long time. Obviously, you were in education for 4 decades. If you were going to help a young leader, let's even go right into it. Someone taking over the basketball program in a high school. Can you zero down? Because we could talk all day. There's so much about leadership, but to help our audience, Zero down to three ideas you would give that leader to help them get off to a good start.
Well, I think you need to sit down and make sure you know what your why is, why
Mm,
you're doing it. I think you need to have a mission statement, if you will.
yeah,
Why are you doing it? Because if you're doing it just for winning, you'll never get enough wins.
yeah.
You just won't. So it's about developing people. And then I think you need to have your values, which I think are your non-negotiables. I
Yeah.
had three of them, and they were trust, accountability, and commitment. And that's what we were looking from everybody. I call it my MVP, which is your mission, your why, and then your values, which are your non-negotiables. And then you got to have a plan. And our plan for us was practice. We taught those values every day in practice, and we tried to make our practice. I had a lot of coaches they seemed to stay up late at night figuring out ways to make practice harder physically, whether it be running or whatever. I did that, but I did it. I wanted it to be more mental,
Mm.
where it created more trust by communication. So we did a lot of disadvantage drills,
Mhm.
6-on-4, 5-on-4. So we were trying to create as much adversity in practice as we could,
Mhm.
teaching those standards and those values, because we believe anybody that's been successful have had to overcome some sort of adversity.
Yep.
And we were teaching that in our practices. I think young coaches now, and I go watch some games and I get a little frustrated at times because you and I have talked a little bit about this. Is One of my mentors was Bob Knight. And people say, "Yeah, you're Bob Knight, and you're one of the inspirations behind Ted Lasso." Bob Knight gave me the greatest gift that you can give any teacher or coach. He taught me how to teach the game. Many coaches can play the game, but that doesn't mean they can teach the game.
What's the difference?
And just because you can play doesn't mean I've seen a lot of coaches that okay, we're going to run this offense, but aren't able to break it down into parts and teach it. And that's what I love doing. I'm going a little crazy here with my philosophy, but I taught motion offense, which we taught kids how to play, not to run plays.
Right.
And we played man-to-man defense because it all taught that connection, that trust, understanding roles, which are important. Everybody has a role, whether it's being in the game or on the bench, and you have to embrace that role. And to me, motion offense is the greatest developer of teamwork of anything you can do. So everything we did started in practice and it developed teamwork. So we created that trust. We held each other accountable, and we were looking for people who are committed to the team first. And I think as a young coach, if you go into an interview and you don't know your why, and you don't know if somebody comes in, and I've always said this, if a blind person came into our practices, within 15 minutes, they should know what we stand for.
Mm.
And that's what we taught every day. I think young coaches need to know their why, and then they need to have what their standards or values are, and then they need to have a plan. And I love organizing practice. I miss that,
Yeah.
and it's not hard because you look at your team and you got to be able to adjust because you think, okay, these are our strengths, these are our weaknesses, but try to set up a team where you're playing to your strengths and away from your weaknesses. It's a coach's fault in which you put a young man or young lady in a situation and they're unable to do what you're asking them to do. That's on the coach.
Right.
And so you have to put people where they can be successful. And then you have to develop those people and teach them to embrace their role. So those are things to me, leadership. I never really felt like I was a leader that coached. I felt like I was a coach that just happened to lead.
Sure. Let's go back even further than that. You talk about putting the right people in the right positions. How about getting the right people on the team in the first place? Because in basketball, in any sport or in any business, talent is an essential component of that. But you haven't really mentioned talent yet. So far, you're mentioning values, you're mentioning character, that we over me attitude. So how do you evaluate, say, a player who's more talented and maybe has less of the attitude versus somebody who has all the attitude and the work ethic in the world, but has less talent?
Boy, that's a great question. I always told my best players that I'm going to be the toughest on you. Do you want to take that responsibility? Because that set the tone for the whole program. And I always liked the player. I'm sure Coach feels the same way. I always loved players that maybe weren't as talented, but I could depend on every day. I knew they were going to give me 110%. And those type of players that are coachable are going to get better. If you have a player, no matter how talented they are, and they're not coachable, that's a problem. And so I looked at players, um, when you have the standards down, your values down, it's pretty easy to evaluate the kind of players you want. Talent is awesome. You're not going to win without talent. But the thing that is try to get those players that are talented to play together. That's coaching. That's leading. And that's something I relish. I love that. And, I was fortunate enough to have really good players. I'm sure Coach did too. And I learned over the years, I was a heck of a lot smarter coach when I had really good players when I didn't. But I just think when look at the NIL now and the collegiate. How many schools, and some of them have figured it out. You can bring all these players in that are really talented, but that doesn't mean they're going to play together. That doesn't mean they're going to work together. So you have to get the not only talented players, but the right talented players. And if they don't want to be coached, then you're wasting your time because you're going to spend all your energy on attitude every day. And my players knew that I was going to coach them and that there can only be one. I don't know if general's the word, but they needed to know that I was the final answer here. When I give them input, you bet I would do that. But again, there has to be one person that's got to be the ultimate leader, and the decisions you make are always what's best for the team. And I always did that. And I think as a leader, you have to make those tough decisions sometimes. I love what Nick Saban says. You want to be a leader, don't sell ice cream. Because you're going to make some tough decisions. I went through cuts every year as coach, I'm sure did, and you have to pick the right best players. You can pick 5 great players, but you got to get the 5 players that'll play together. And I think we did a pretty good job of that. And if you're a person that can take a group of kids and build them into a team, you're a special person. That's leading. It's easy to get good players, but can you get them to play together?
Sure.
And I think that's something that our coaching staff did a good job. I can't say it was me. I had really good coaches that were with me, and we were all on the same page. I heard this, and this is so true. I didn't want assistants that were yes people. I wanted assistants that would tell me what I needed to hear, maybe not what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
So we had every coach at our tryouts, every tryout, freshman through high school varsity. And we'd sit down at night at a table and we'd go through every player. And one of the assistants maybe not say anything. I said, well, why would I hire you if you're not going to say anything? I value your input. And they appreciated that because I just felt that was so important. And but to get talented players to play together, I think you have to have the right talented players. And I think some of these coaches have figured it out. I think some coaches haven't. I played at Kansas State football and basketball, and I love Kansas State. If you stick me, I'm purple through and through. I have my purple shirt on today. In fact, they have one of the highest NIL monies of anybody in the country.
Really? Wow.
And they weren't even 500 last year.
Yeah, I was gonna say wow.
So what I'm saying is that they have the means, the resources, but just because you can get those players in, and I'm not blaming the coaches for that because I don't know how they do it, to be honest with you. I don't know how you pay players this amount of money and try to bring them in to get them to play together. Some of the coaches have figured it out. And if you don't, you're not going to be able to stay in it because the horse is out of the barn. You better figure it out. or you're not going to win games, which means if you don't win games at that level, you're not going to stay where you're at.
You know, it's interesting because one of the things that's fascinated me, Danny, in the last couple of years is what the Kurt Signetti has done at Indiana, and the fact that they won a national championship in 2 years and probably one of the worst Division I football programs in America until he took over. But you're so right. And what I've really tried to read about him is, what is he doing there? Because I'll never forget when they were in the playoffs and they beat Alabama. They crushed them. And Alabama had like 44 4- and 5-star players. Indiana had 6 4-star players. So there's something there that really, like you said, is you got to get talented players, but you got to get the right players because they don't buy in on what's going on. I got to delve in though because John had a great question about picking the right players. Tell us your advice on picking the right staff members.
Well, number one, they have to know the game. They have to be able to teach, and they've got to be good for kids, and then they got to be loyal. And those are the three things I looked at. I would rather take a guy or a gal that maybe didn't know basketball, but wanted to be a really good basketball coach, that loved kids. I can teach them to be a coach.
Right.
I can't teach somebody that's not a good person. I can't change their character. So that's what I looked at. You looked at coaches that had quality character, that wanted to teach and wanted to be loyal. And we had some heated discussions sometimes in our office doors over things, but the guys knew that after I made the final decision, correct, that we have to live with it, and then can't be everything stays in here, and that's kind of how I did things with my coaches. I was lucky. I had really good assistants. My two last assistant coaches were head coaches. One had formerly been a head coach, and in fact, he interviewed for my job and didn't get it.
Oh, wow.
And then he came and we talked, and I ended up hiring him, and he was tremendous. He was basically a head coach. And then my assistant that I had at Shawnee Mission West when I coached Jason Sudeikis, he's since passed. He had been in this school before I took it, so he had a little bit of history. He didn't get the job, and we had talked, and I said, I don't, and he was not happy about it, of course. I'm sure you've been in that situation too. And I just told him and said, hey, don't be mad at me for, I didn't hire me, right? I mean, don't be mad at me, right? So, and we had a great relationship because he was another one that knew the game, loved kids, and was loyal to me. And I gave him
So
a lot of responsibility to all my assistants. I think that's what my head coach did for me, which prepared me to be a head coach later.
what did you like better, coach? Coaching basketball or teaching math?
I think they're one and the same. I
You're
think I got into teaching and coaching to be a basketball coach first,
okay.
but I think as I taught, I realized that you can make a huge impact with a number of kids in the math classroom just as much as you can the basketball program. And I get numerous emails and things from people that I just didn't coach basketball, but I taught math, and the impact you make. I mean, they're not going to remember that I taught them how to factor a quadratic trinomial. They're going to remember how you made them feel. And I
Yep.
think that's something in leadership that, again, people have to know that you care.
Yeah.
They have to know that you really care about them. And if they do know that, then you can be as demanding as you want to be on those folks if they know deep down inside that you care about them as a person.
Yeah. Well, speaking of demanding, though, that's quite the role to, be a full-time teacher, which is full-time role in and of itself, but then to run a program and be the head of everything that goes into that. So talk to the young leaders who might be struggling with a job and a side job or a job and a passion, and tell them how you were able to manage it and share some tips with them.
Well, my assistants always said that I was the most anal person they'd ever been around in their life because I was into details. I was very organized. And I think you get to sit down and organize your life. I always organize my week on Sunday nights. But I also think the things that you got to prioritize what needs to get done first. My number one job is to be a math teacher first. So when you get hired, do they want you to be a basketball coach first or a math teacher first? So every Saturday for I don't know how long during the basketball season, I would go in and plan my week. I had all my lesson plans, everything done because that was my first job. All my grading and everything I did on the weekends because I knew coaching basketball during the seasons, Coach Will knows, it's a very demanding job. So I think coaches, number one, need to be organized and then they need to know the things that they need to do too, right? Because I think I think a lot of coaches think that it's just, practice. That's the fun part. The games are the fun part. There's a lot of other stuff that go into, and now just think with social media, and I haven't been involved as much with that. Now that's involved promoting your players, selling your program. So there's a lot of things, and then you have to be able to delegate. You have to have coaches that you can delegate these things to, whether it be scouting, whether it be budgeting, whether it be ordering stuff, whether it be offense, defense, and all that stuff. I mean, we never changed much. That's the thing I loved about coaching motion offenses. We didn't change a lot. We would change our alignments based on our personnel, but we did basically the same thing every day, every year. And then, but they, again, it's just organization. And I think it's important to, as a young coach, to find somebody who's really, really good, because I've always believed successful people leave clues, and find somebody and just start asking questions. That's the thing that I used to do, and I still do it now, is ask questions from people that are successful.
Yeah.
And say, hey, what are the things that I need to be doing to organize my program? Because when I was a first year head coach, I understood it because been an assistant for 3. But I think a lot of young coaches, they jump into a job and they really don't know the amount of work and organization and that goes into it. And you better have, most importantly, and Coach would say the same thing, and I'm sure you would say the same thing too, John, is that you better have a spouse that supports you, because during the basketball season, they're basically a widow. And I was so lucky that my wife was tremendous. She knew we were dating when I got my first head coaching job, and she saw the hours that I put in, and she knew it was my passion, it was my love. So she started doing a lot of stuff within the basketball program to help me. But the biggest thing is she made things at home easy for me, where when I came home, I could just be a dad. And I think anybody that's a young coach, you better have a spouse that's supportive. That might be the number one thing to make sure you have, because it's a tough job. It really is.
I would agree. I'm working on number 44 year this year with my wife. So I will say one little sidelight, and then I want to delve into 2 more things for me. You talked about hiring head coaches. Well, when I took over my last program, ironically, the head coach at that school that had been out of for 3 years and his longtime assistant both applied for the job, and they ended up doing my middle school for almost my entire 20-year career. So it was kind of exactly, they were too happy that because I was coming from another school to get the job. But yeah, so I get your challenges with that. But so I got to ask you, you brought up delegation, and I think that's so important to be an effective leader, and young leaders struggle, I think, with that. So do you have some keys to help young leaders with delegating?
Well, I think too, you got to ask, what are your goals? What do you want to be? Some coaches don't want to be a head coach. So you just and I think after the first year, I think you got to do it. The first year you're a coach, you just got to kind of watch and listen and see what their strengths and weaknesses are, and put them in situations as you do your players that they can be successful. If they want to be a head coach, they want to move up the ladder, if you will, then I would give them different responsibilities that go into preparing them to be a head coach. Whether it be travel, getting all the buses, budgeting, scouting, organizing practice, working with parents, and I had an open door policy when it came to parents. I really did. But we're only got, we had that parent meeting every year, as you did, I'm sure, and talked about, when and where we talk with parents, and then what we'll talk about. We won't talk about playing time. We won't talk about somebody else's player, somebody else's kid, and we won't talk about philosophy. So there really wasn't much to talk about. So we didn't have a lot of those meetings. But I think you got to know your assistants, what their strengths and weaknesses are, put them, find out what they want, what's their aspirations, and then if they want to move up the ladder, give them responsibility to learn and to make mistakes, as we all learn from our mistakes, right? Because if you're a leader, you're going to make mistakes because leaders are doers. And also as a leader to make sure that the coaches understood that admit when you make a mistake, because it's okay to make a mistake. Try not to make it twice, right? And I go back to an old I got from a quote a long, long time ago from Dean Smith. How do you handle a mistake? You recognize it, you admit it, you learn from it, you forget about it. Jason Sudeikis' quote, I'll guarantee you got from this, is what's the happiest animal on earth is? It's a goldfish. Why? Because it's got a 10-second memory. So recognize it, admit it, learn from it, forget it. Be a goldfish, move on, be where your feet are.
Yeah. Wow, that's so cool. Now I gotta interject here and ask about one thing, because as we look behind you, we see a few different elements, but one of them that really stands out is that word believe. It's written there behind you in big letters right next to your head. Our YouTube audience could see it. Tell us what that word means to you and why it's so important to have it up framed in your office.
Well, I think there's a couple things here. Number one is this, I think I mentioned it earlier, that people need to know that you believe in them. And it's pretty easy to believe in them when things are going well. But what if, I had a young man that missed a free throw one time to put us into overtime to make us to the state final. And to make sure that that young man, I would say something like this. I said, if it happens again, the next time you'll make it. And it will happen again because I'm going to put you in that situation again. They need to know that you believe in them. And then most importantly, I think you need to, as a person, need to believe in yourself. And I think the way you believe in yourself is to do your preparation. Make sure you're ready for your opportunities. There's another quote that I remember, confidence is demonstrated ability. You need to practice where you're uncomfortable. You need to put yourself in a situation where when the game comes up, you have to make practice harder than games. That's what we talk to our players about with practice. Make games like practice and practice like games. We want practice to be harder than the game to develop that confidence where they believed in themselves. So number one is you have to make sure your players know that you believe in them no matter what. And number two, there needs to be an inner confidence where you believe in yourself, and you do that through your preparation.
Well said. Well, Donnie, very grateful of all your great insights. I have one more question, then John will wrap it up. He may have a question and how we can, our audience can connect. But not just give away all your thunder, but now you're traveling the country giving 40 or 50 speeches a year. Can you talk a little bit about your message that you share with leaders around the country?
I talk basically about leadership, about motivation and inspiration. And I talk about, you're in leadership, your example is not the main thing, it's the only thing. Mm-hmm. And then I talk about my MVP, which is your mission, your values, your plan. And I go through stories about players teaching those lessons. And then I talk about our plan about practice and the importance of your preparation in anything that you do, and try to create an atmosphere of learning and try to create an atmosphere of adversity where that teaches them to embrace it. So those are what I talk about in my keynote. And of course, within all that are all the different stories of all the players that I've had and the lessons that I learned, because in my leadership journey, you learn so much more from your own frustrations than you ever do success. Because the hardest thing for any human being to deal with are two things: losing and winning. When you lose, you don't really believe in yourself. You think you're doing things wrong. And then winning, you get complacent. You don't keep the hammer down. And I was always trying to fight with our players, because when you're winning, they get complacent. I was probably harder on my teams when we won than when we lost. When we lost, I was probably a little more forgiving on certain things. That didn't mean that I didn't say, hey, we got to get better at these things. But those are things that I do in my keynote. And what you're seeing right now is me. I just tell stories. I'm very authentic. What you see is what you get. And I think people like that because I spoke at a thing, at a deal out in Salt Lake City, and a gal came up to me and just appreciated my authenticity, and the stories that I could relate to what they have in the business world. And that means so much to me because I take great pride in going out and speaking and teaching, and hopefully that. And I tell people when they come listen to me speak, try to take one thing out of it that will make a difference in your leadership. If you try to take 10 things out of it, then you're probably not going to get anything out of it because less is more, isn't it?
One of my better teams towards the end of my career, we did a seasonal slogan, and the slogan was playing to our standard. I'll never forget because our team was really good that year, and we beat a team by about 25 or 30, but we did not play well. And I'll never forget because we always did a team wraparound after the game. And one of my captains said, "Coach, we didn't play to our standard." And I said, "You know what? They're getting it this year."
Yeah.
When you're watching Ted Lasso, you're really watching this guy, Coach Donnie Campbell. It must be kind of surreal watching Ted Lasso and go, "Hey, that's me," right?
It is. It's very surreal, and it's one of those shows that reminds me of when I was growing up. The shows that we had on TV, for example, would be like Andy Griffith, and it made you feel good after you watch it, but there was always a lesson in it, and I think that's why people gravitate towards it. They feel better after they watch it, but they
Right.
also learn something that I heard this morning, and what was it? If you want to feel the world is bad, watch the news. If you want to see the world that's really kind and great, go outside. And that's what that show does. You just feel good and you learn some lessons within the show that reminds me of Andy Griffith, of Gunsmoke, or whatever the shows that I had growing up. And I hope a lot more people watch it because it really makes they'll feel better by watching it. And it's really surreal that I get to see many of the lessons that I taught Jason and his teammates 30 years earlier being applied in a show about a football soccer coach.
Yeah. Are you still in close contact with Jason today?
He's a little harder to get a hold of now.
Yeah, I bet. Even though
No,
you deserve it, though. I mean, you're the inspiration. You should get some royalties or something.
no, but a real quick story. My wife's parents are in assisted living place, and they're really good health. They're in their 90s, and Jason's mother is a travel agent here in Kansas City, and she does all the travel arrangements for all the people the celebrities that come in for his Big Slick, which is they raise money to help with Children's Mercy. And she came in to talk to where my wife's parents lived, to all of them there, to all the people that lived there, and all she talked about was me and the impact that I made in Jason's life.
Wow.
And of course, Janice's parents, as soon as she left, they were calling me, and it really is surreal. And I'm blessed to be honest with you, I'm blessed that I've had the opportunity to teach and coach so many great kids through the years. I miss it. I miss being in the gym. I miss being in the classroom. You're always, as Coach well knows, you're always a coach. You're always teaching. That's never out of your blood. I'm just lucky that I had the opportunity to do it for 40 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and now your work continues just in a different way. I know you're busy. You're doing a lot of traveling and a lot of speaking, so I know your calendar fills up pretty fast. But if somebody's interested in getting in touch with you and potentially bringing you in to speak to their organization, how do they do that?
Just go to upsidespeakers.com. Speakers, that's the organization I'm with, and Kelly Dorseth is my manager, and she does all my logistics and everything for me. And I do have a website. It's www.coachdonniecampbell.com, and they can reach out to me, and then it goes right to my through the website right to my manager, Upside Speakers. And it's interesting. When I started speaking, I really didn't want to speak. My daughters are the ones that and my wife said, "Dad, you'd be awesome. You'd be awesome." And I just really, and then I had some people after Jason mentioned my name on a morning television show. I had people contacting me, wanted me to come talk to their group. So I went and talked to a group, and I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
So then I somehow got Kelly's name and reached out to her, and she got back with me, and I spoke at a group. She helped me do it, about 4 or 5 slides, and I went and spoke to this group, and she watched me on stage, and I was scared to death because it was the first one I've ever done. I think it was in front of about 500 or 600 parents and players. And afterwards, a former teacher had come up, or a teacher came up to say, she was in tears. She was so inspired. She goes, "I'm ready to start the year." And then so I went to Kelly because I'm a straight shooter. I said, "Well, Kelly, what do you think? Yes or no?" And she goes, "No, we're going to get started here. We're going to." So she got me with a keynote writer and a speaking person to help me, and the rest is history. And I still get to teach, but it's to a different platform now, right?
Right.
And I got great gratitude
Yeah.
about this. I feel very blessed.
It's really cool. Those links down in the show notes if you want to learn more about Donnie Campbell, Coach Campbell. Wow, shared so many great things in here during our episode, and we know that Ted Lasso, that the some new Ted Lasso is out. So if you're looking to see the fictionalized version of Coach Campbell, you got that. So, Coach, thanks so much for your time
Thank you.
today. Say hi to Mr. Sudeikis for us, and we look
I
forward
will
to
do it.
staying in touch and continuing to share your journey.
Awesome. Thank you guys for having me. It's an
Thank you,
honor.
Danny.